History will tell you Rome brought roads, order, and civilization, but it will not tell you what the soldiers did after the cities fell silent. It will not tell you what happened to the women who survived the fire but not the aftermath. They were not just taken, they were erased, renamed, broken into silence, and displayed like trophies. Rome called it conquest, but for the women left behind, it was something else, something worse than death. This is the voice of one they tried to forget. The smoke came first, black ropes unraveling the sky, and then the fire behind it, rolling like a beast across the hills. We had been told the Romans were far, perhaps slowed by winter, but they came before dawn, when even the dogs were too cold to bark. I remember the sound of metal on frozen earth, horses coughing steam, and then the shriek of the first torch dropped into a thatched roof. The fire spread fast. My mother was the one who screamed first, not from pain but warning, her voice cracking through the dark like a breaking branch. My father was already dead by the time I saw him, his neck torn open by something too clean to be a blade. My sister Mira was beside me, barefoot in the snow, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. We ran, or tried to. There was nowhere to go. Soldiers blocked the roads. Some dragged women by the hair. Others stabbed the men who begged for mercy. They didn't speak our language, but they laughed like they understood everything. I saw a boy try to climb a tree and get pulled down with a hook. I saw a woman cradle her infant, only to have it torn from her and thrown into the fire. The worst part wasn't the violence, it was the order, the calm, the way they moved like butchers, not berserkers. When they reached us, one soldier looked me up and down, said something to the others, and struck Mira across the face. She fell. I tried to go to her, but another man pressed the flat of his blade to my throat and whispered, "No." That was the only word I understood. The fires rose behind me. I didn't cry, not then. I watched Mira crawl toward me, blood running from her ear. She reached out her hand, and then someone grabbed my arms from behind and pulled me away. That was the last time I saw her. That was the last moment I was anyone's sister, anyone's daughter, anyone with a name. From that moment on, I was something else. Not quite dead, not quite living, just captured. They stripped us before the sun came up, not all at once, but methodically, row by row, as if undressing animals for auction. The snow had melted near the fires they had lit for themselves, but we stood in the cold mud, barefoot, naked, and silent. When someone cried out, they were struck. When someone covered themselves, their hands were tied behind their back. I did neither. I stared at the ground, not from shame, but because looking up made it worse. The Roman soldiers circled us slowly, their armor still wet with blood from the night before. One of them laughed and pointed to a girl beside me, no older than 10, and called her Little Venus. The others laughed with him. I did not know their words, but I understood their eyes. When it was my turn, a man with red cloth on his shoulder cupped my chin and tilted my face toward the light. He turned my head, left, then right, as if inspecting a statue, then ran his hand down my arm. I could feel him judging the shape of my bones, the width of my hips, the curve of my back. I did not move. When he was done, he tied a strip of dyed cloth around my wrist. It was purple, and that meant something, though I didn't know what. The women without cloth were taken elsewhere. We never saw them again. Those of us marked were chained together and marched to the camp at the edge of the ruins. I do not remember how long the walk was, only that it smelled of ash and feet and something metallic beneath it all. The camp was surrounded by wooden stakes and moats, but there were no walls for us. We were kept in open tents, tied to poles, fed once a day with something that tasted like spoiled grain and river water. We were not allowed to speak our language. When one woman tried to sing an old morning song under her breath, a soldier cut her hair off with a blade and forced her to swallow it. At night, we huddled together for warmth, not from the cold, but from the silence that came after the screaming stopped. A girl named Sila tried to escape on the third night. They caught her before she reached the edge of the woods. The next morning, her body was tied to the post in the center of the camp, her hands twisted the wrong way. We were told this was mercy, that Roman mercy was swift, that this was discipline, not cruelty. But I knew better. It was theater, a warning, and we were the audience, clapping with our silence. They paraded us through the streets of Rome like prizes, but not even the gods could look us in the eye. We were shackled by the neck, wrists, and ankles, the iron still warm from the forge, wrapped in ropes soaked in animal fat so they would not burn our skin too quickly. The crowd waited long before we arrived, cheering the general's name, throwing flower petals and rotten fruit alike. I remember one man holding up his infant son and pointing toward me, as if to say, "Look what victory looks like." My skin was still bruised from the bindings, my hair hacked short, my body barely clothed. We were made to walk barefoot on the jagged stones of the Triumph Road, past the statues of gods I did not know, past buildings that looked like they had never burned. The people clapped, they smiled, they called out words like beauty, spoils, and honor, but none of it felt human. Behind us walked carts piled with silver, weapons, broken idols, and painted shields from our homeland, the bones of a people turned into theater. Roman guards flanked us on both sides, holding spears tipped not with metal but with the skulls of our fallen. One girl tripped and fell forward. Her chains pulled the rest of us down. A soldier kicked her in the stomach until she stopped moving, and then they dragged her to the side like a sack of flour and told us to keep going. No one dared look back. At the Forum, the parade slowed. Drums beat louder. Someone poured perfume into the air, but it could not cover the smell of sweat, blood, and piss. The general stood above us on a platform, draped in a crimson cloak, his face painted with something gold. When his eyes passed over me, I felt no hatred, only emptiness. He raised his hand. The crowd roared, and then he ordered wine to be poured on our heads, a mock baptism. A Roman boy, no older than 12, smeared ash on my cheeks and whispered, "Now you belong to us." That night, they separated us again. The young were taken one way, the quiet ones another. I was led to a villa on the Palatine Hill, past marble statues of wolves and women feeding twins. The guard told me not to speak unless asked. I asked where my sister was. He struck me across the mouth and said, "She's gone." That was my welcome into the heart of Rome, not as a citizen, not even as a slave, but as a trophy that breathed, as a body that moved only when commanded. Rome had conquered my homeland in one day, but it would spend years unmaking the rest of me. They gave me a white robe and told me to kneel beside the crib. The marble floors were cold, even through the linen, and the scent of crushed rose petals couldn't cover the sour milk in the air. The matron of the house, a woman with a voice like dried parchment, told me that the child's mother had died in childbirth, and that the boy would starve if I didn't do my duty. She said it as if the child's life now belonged to my breasts, as if that made me sacred. But I was not sacred. I was filled with grief and swollen with milk meant for a baby burned in a fire I could still smell when I closed my eyes. They forced the infant to my chest before I had the chance to speak. He latched. I did not cry. I was told I would stay in that room, the one with the painted ceiling and the carved gods looking down with bored expressions. They called it the room of fertility. I called it the tomb with windows. I was not permitted to leave except to be washed. I was not permitted to speak unless spoken to. I was told to smile when the senator's wife visited, though she never looked at me directly. She only inspected the child, not the woman who kept him alive. When he cried, they summoned me. When he laughed, they summoned others to watch. My body was a vessel, nothing more. The other women in the villa whispered at night. One had been here since she was 12. Another claimed she had once been the daughter of a tribal chief, though now she scrubbed floors and limped when it rained. I didn't tell them my story. I was afraid if I said my sister's name aloud, Rome would find it and crush it underfoot. One afternoon, the child stopped breathing. He had been coughing, then wheezing, then silent. I held him and rocked him, and when they found us, I was still singing not a Roman lullaby, but the song my mother used to hum when storms came over the hills. The senator's wife slapped me and screamed. Guards came. A physician blamed me. He said I had cursed the milk, that my body carried the poisons of a savage people. I was beaten, locked in the storeroom for 2 nights. No food, no light, only the smell of olive oil and blood from old butchered lambs. When they let me out, I was not punished further. No one spoke of the boy again. A new child arrived within the month, swaddled in gold cloth. I was made to smile and kneel again. My name was never used. They called me nurse, as if I had been born for this, as if I had not buried a life every time I gave one away. There were collars, and then there were the red ones. Most were made of bronze, engraved with the name of the master and the price paid, like a receipt worn around the neck. But the red ones weren't metal. They were leather, dyed with oxblood and salt, rough to the touch, and left on only those who had tried to flee or defy the order of things. We learned quickly that if a woman returned wearing one, she was no longer whole. If she didn't return at all, she had tried harder. There was a girl named Lyra, barely grown, with eyes the color of wet bark and a habit of tracing patterns on her thigh with her thumb when she thought no one was watching. She was taken to the military barracks near the edge of the city, where men on leave paid to forget the faces of their mothers and wives. We saw her once after that, walking with her head down, red collar tight against her throat, wrists bound in front. She didn't look at us, not even when her name was whispered. That night, she was found hanging from a tree inside the villa courtyard, her body staged like a festival, offering limbs arranged, robe torn, mouth stuffed with laurel leaves. No one claimed her. No one was allowed to grieve. A slave who cried was punished. A slave who prayed was beaten. A slave who remembered was sent away. The matron simply ordered the tiles beneath Lyra's body scrubbed clean and replaced the tree's soil. The next morning, another girl was taken in her place. The soldiers chose by gesture, not by name. They pointed, nodded, dragged. Sometimes they flipped a coin. We were not women to them, just entries in a logbook, weights of flesh to be borrowed, spent, returned, or forgotten. I kept my head low. I stopped speaking unless asked. When I bled, I hid the cloth. When I dreamed, I did not wake smiling. There was no privacy. The bathhouse was watched. The kitchens were patrolled. Even in sleep, we were never alone. The red-collared women were always first to be punished, first to be sent, first to be broken. It was a mark not only of rebellion, but of usefulness. A soldier once told me with a smirk, "Red means she bites, but only once." I wanted to bite. I wanted to scream, but I learned what Lyra had not. Rome didn't fear resistance. Rome absorbed it. It displayed it. It wore your pain like a jewel on its crown. The only way to survive was to disappear without vanishing. To become so small, so obedient, so forgettable, that even cruelty passed you over. But even then, survival was not life. It was just the pause before being chosen. When I was sold again, it happened without warning or ceremony. A scroll was signed, a purse exchanged, and I was taken from the villa in silence. No goodbye, no explanation. The guards didn't even remove my sandals. They simply pulled me toward a litter waiting outside, where the curtain was drawn shut and the emblem of a black wolf stitched into the fabric. I knew the symbol. It meant the man inside was of rank senatorial or worse. I did not see his face until we arrived. The villa was smaller than the one before, but colder. Clean in a way that felt surgical. The kind of silence where even the gods dare not breathe. The man who owned it was pale, tall, and smelled of paper and oils. He did not leer. He did not strike. He studied. The first time he spoke to me, it was not to ask my name, it was to ask how my people grieved. I did not answer. He did not punish me. He simply made a note on the parchment in front of him and moved on. Over the weeks, I realized he was not interested in pleasure. He wanted knowledge. He measured my limbs, compared my dialect to other captives, took locks of my hair and burned them to observe the smell. Once, he asked if I remembered the taste of the sacred herb my mother used during births. When I hesitated, he forced open my mouth, placed something bitter on my tongue, and watched for my reaction. I could not decide if this was better than what came before. He called me specimen, said it without cruelty, as if that word absolved him of sin. He invited guests, sometimes, other men in robes with scrolls and quiet voices. They stood around me like priests before an altar, discussing the shapes of my bones, the curl of my ear, the strength of my teeth. One of them said I was preserved well, Another said I should have been taken younger. None of them asked what I remembered. None of them asked what I lost. At night, I was locked in a room without windows, the walls lined with tablets etched in Latin I could not read. Some had illustrations. One showed a woman bound to a chair, her mouth sewn shut with thread. Another showed a slave girl with twin infants on her lap, one Roman, one not, both crying. I traced their faces with my fingers in the dark, over and over, until the stone grew warm beneath my touch. I began to forget my old language. The songs came back to me in fragments. Sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I heard Mira's voice, calling me from behind a curtain I could no longer lift. But even then, I stayed silent. Rome had no use for women who remembered, and even less for women who spoke. By the time my hair had turned gray, they moved me again. No ceremony, no whip, just a silent transfer like a coin passed from one hand to another. I was not sold this time. I was discarded, delivered to a cloister near the edge of the Aventine, where women like me were kept out of sight. No one said the word broken, but it hung in the air like incense. The gates creaked behind me, locking not with chains but with indifference. There were others, dozens, maybe more. Some sat all day in the sun, mouths open, eyes fixed on nothing. Some muttered to themselves in dialects I could barely recognize. One woman screamed every time she saw fire. Another carved the same symbol over and over on the stone, with her fingernail a spiral, tight and endless. We were not prisoners, not exactly. There were no guards, only silence and the knowledge that there was nowhere left to go. Rome didn't need walls to keep you in once it had taken your voice. I slept on a straw mat beside a woman named Dasa, who had once birthed 4 sons for a Roman general, and had not spoken since the last one was sent to war and returned without a head. She braided my hair each morning, even when it fell out in clumps. It was the only thing her hands remembered. There were no mirrors, no names, no time. Some days, women were taken away by priests who said prayers in Latin as they led them down the hill. No one ever came back. We told ourselves it was mercy, a quiet death, a soft goodbye, but I knew better. Rome doesn't forget. It just buries what it doesn't want to explain. In the cloister, there was one room at the far end, locked with a rusted bar. No one was allowed inside. But sometimes at night, I saw candlelight flicker through the cracks, and I heard humming not in Latin, not in Greek, but in the old songs, the ones we sang when the world still felt like ours. One morning, I found a quilt laid over my feet, stitched with patterns I remembered from my mother's hands, spirals, mountains, birds with open wings. No one claimed it. No one looked at it, but I wept until my ribs ached. That night, I whispered Mira's name for the first time in years, and somewhere, someone hummed the last line of the song she used to sing. It was not salvation, it was not freedom, but it was a thread, a thin red thread reminding me I had not imagined myself, that once I was whole, that before Rome swallowed me, I had been someone, a daughter, a sister, a voice that still trembled behind stone. The inscription was still there, carved into the stone arch above the road that led out of the cloister, Pax Romana, Roman peace, chiseled deep and painted gold so it would catch the Sunday tourists pass beneath it now, taking photographs and smiling. They admire the symmetry, the architecture, the triumph of empire. No one looks down. No one sees the grooves in the stones worn smooth by bare feet, or the tiny scratches made by fingernails desperate to hold on to something as they were dragged away. The records say the war ended, that peace followed, that Rome civilized the world. But I know what peace cost. I wore it like a collar. I buried it like a child. I fed it with my voice and watched it rot in my throat. They called it order, but it was only silence, and Rome was a master of silence. The cloister was emptied in winter. I don't know if it was plague or policy. One by one, the women vanished. The humming stopped. The doors creaked but did not open. On the last morning, a priest came to my door and told me I was free. He said it like a blessing, as if freedom were something I could carry in my hands. I asked him where I should go. He said nothing, just bowed and walked away. I stood in the ruins of that place, surrounded by empty mats and forgotten sandals, and realized I no longer knew where the sky ended or where my body began. My feet took me through the old streets, past markets and fountains and temples, still standing like they had never trembled. Children ran past me with olives in their hands. A woman laughed in a language I almost understood, and then I saw her, a little girl kneeling by a crack in the pavement, singing a tune no Roman would ever teach. It was one note off, but I knew it. I stopped. She looked up. Her eyes were like mirrors, not the color, not the shape, but the stillness, the knowing. She did not smile. She just nodded, once, and returned to her song. I kept walking, past the Triumph Road, past the statue of the she-wolf, past the very forum where I had once been marched in chains. No one remembered me. No one stopped me. No one asked my name. Rome had moved on, but I had not. I am still here, beneath the stones, in the humming, in the lines of a forgotten lullaby. You may never find my grave. You may never know my face. But if you listen long enough, when the city is quiet and the light is soft, you might hear me, not screaming, not begging, just remembering. That is what they never took. That is how I survived. I remember. History carved the Roman Empire in stone but buried the women in silence. If this story stayed with you, it was meant to. Subscribe to Forgotten Stories, Ancient World for more voices. History tried to erase and the horrors they were never meant to survive. Tap the bell so you never miss a truth whispered through time. Comment I remember if you heard her voice.